everybody. You'll notice that this meeting is being recorded. I think you can all hear that. We are going to record this meeting, last technical point, and we're going to do it at, we're going to put breaks in at every session. We're going to do that so that it's easier for people to pick and choose after the fact about how they participate in, rather than having to fast forward through many gigabytes worth of video in order to get something they'd like in the future. We're going to break them into separate recorded sessions. So count on those in the future. Think about who you want to share these things with, even as we go through, gee, I wish some so-and-so were here. Well, so-and-so can be here. In fact, welcome to those of you who are present, not with us in time, but across time. Many of you will be present in the future, and this forum is just as much for you as it is for those of us who are sitting here now. This is an interesting philosophical moment. We're united in across space and across time a little bit through these recordings, and this is sort of the new normal. It's getting normal really fast that we participate remotely. We'll have a chance to focus on these very features at the end of our day. But first, I'd like to introduce to you all the forum in a couple of moments and our first speaker. So this forum has been held annually. This is year 13. It emerged out of a group of high school physics teachers, actually 20 years ago, began to gather with university researchers and really break down a divide between those who do research and those who invite people up into the fruits of research is one way to look at it. Those who are effectively issuing invitations in a classroom into STEM literacy. And quite often those two areas didn't get connected very well, and we sought to bridge that gap by inviting high school physics teachers first, and then teachers invited students into the research community. That of course was a challenge, as you might imagine, and we've got 20 years of craft at overcoming a lot of those challenges. Eventually, 7 years later, that group grew to think of education, to experience education a bit differently, as really the issuing of effective invitations into a community. At first, a high-energy physics community, but increasingly an interdisciplinary community, even just inside the university. And so we needed a space to invite teachers and researchers into common activities. And so the forum grew up, and we thought about ourselves in terms of building an integrated STEM community. So that we really were saying to students, this community, which first of all is a community, and exists and is doing an enormous amount of interesting things on the research, the cutting edge research end. And this community absolutely needs you. And that invitation, we experienced ourselves as physics teachers, I was one, as a very powerful way of transforming our engagement with students. That forum, though, as it grew along, became all of us together more and more aware that the divide between university researchers and educators was not the only divide we were facing in education. Just as much, we began to see as the university worked in commercialization efforts, that also was a connection that needed to be made between, say, commerce and research. And that oftentimes takes the shape of startups, but of course it isn't only startups, it's just as much industry. And whether it's R&D in an industry space or just the actual practice of engineering in an engineering, say in a manufacturing setting. So that design also, or rather that divide also, is something that the forum seeks to overcome. Increasingly, that means workforce development and education look very much like the same thing, like a somewhat fractured community that is increasingly becoming more and more integrated and is increasingly thinking more, recognizing more these interdependencies that the community has. Now that vision for our forum is nowhere so well incarnated, I think, as in the governor's workforce cabinet. There you see initiatives, you see thinking coming out of the state of Indiana to rethink the relationship between careers, workforce, or day-to-day education, all the way right down to K-12, and integrated all the way through, as they say, sometimes K through gray, lifelong learning. That whole effort that requires integration is really being integrated in various ways, sometimes bumps in the road as different people experience different asks in this space, but always with an attempt to gather people together and build a future together in the state. We are very fortunate today to have the executive director of the governor's workforce cabinet, PJ McGrew, with us. PJ has a long and distinguished bio. What I want to do is to tailor it just for those of us on the conversation today. It's suffice it to say that he has been in the trenches at a lot of different levels, in the classroom, a classroom practitioner, a administrator in a school context, as well as a policymaker, and a policymaker at a lot of different levels. Just to name one, chief of staff of the Indiana Board of Education, for example. And then eventually, and I couldn't get the years right, PJ, I apologize, but moving into the governor's workforce cabinet in a variety of roles, and now as its executive director. So I could try and tell you something more about the governor's workforce cabinet, but it would be an amateur speaking in the presence of a professional. So without other words, PJ, let me just hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. That was a great introduction, and so much of the work that you've outlined that this group embarked upon the 20 years ago, or this being year 13. It's just astounding to me. That integration, inviting folks in, thinking about STEM a little bit more broadly than just those 4 content areas. As a former math teacher, that's speaks right to my heart. And so, thinking about the workforce development, education, and that overlap that exists, it is something that we're solely focused on, with the workforce cabinet. A little bit of background, this, I kind of changed up a little bit, knowing that I was going to be the keynote and we were going to do this in a virtual format today. So I put together a presentation. I'm not sure how much all of the attendees are aware of the cabinet activity. So I want to really talk through 3 different things today. One, just kind of the history and background of the cabinet, and then 2, our current work on career and technical education and where we're going with that. And then 3, on Thursday, we passed unanimously through the cabinet our state workforce strategic plan. So I want to talk through a little bit of the design process and where we're going with that. So with that being said, I will go ahead and just kind of walk through the presentation here, if that is all right with everyone. So, the history of the cabinet, we are still in our infancy. We were created by Senate Enrolled Act 50 during the 2018 legislative session to replace our state workforce innovation council. Every state is required by federal law to have a state workforce board. Our workforce board sat underneath our Department of Workforce Development for a number of years, and was really kind of siloed off, even though we had many of the same agencies that are on the cabinet now on the Workforce Innovation Council. It being underneath DWD, it was primarily seen as a Department of Workforce Development activity. And so with the governor's focus on creating that better alignment between education and workforce, we worked with the legislature to pull that out from under DWD in 2018 and moved it directly under the governor's office. And so that really allows us to focus on the entire talent development system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but really not just the integration of workforce development and education, and knowing that workforce development in this, day and age, in this type of economy, really is about educational attainment and lifelong learning. But also, what are those social services that can be integrated into our educational workforce to really help people get people where they want to go? And so this, provides a mechanism for all of the state agencies that are in this space. We have the Department of Workforce Development, Commission for Higher Education, Department of Education, Economic Development, our Family and Social Services Administration, Department of Corrections, and our Career Connections and Talent agency, all working together to collaborate on initiatives to move the state forward. It really provided us with an opportunity for comprehensive examination of the various programs. Each one of these agencies have some type of education or workforce development activity underneath them. And so what does that overlap look like, and how can we better integrate some of those services? And then, I'm sure many of you know or are aware, there are a number of federal programs that exist that provide different funding streams into each of these agencies. And so how do we better integrate those funding streams under a more unified vision? So as Tom mentioned, I moved over from the governor's office. I was the governor's education policy director from 2017 to 2018 when we created the workforce cabinet, and moved over as the policy director for the cabinet then. And then in May of 2019, I moved into the executive director role. And when I moved into that role, I interviewed all of our cabinet members, our agency heads, and our employers, community-based organizations that are on the cabinet, and really wanted to revitalize some of the work that we've been doing, but also, be a little bit, look back and say, okay, where are we going? What have we done? Where do we want to go? And so that required us, revamping our mission and vision. And so through those one-on-one interviews with our cabinet members, we developed this unified vision here that we passed in October of this year. And this really helped us drive where we were going with our strategic plan that we passed just this week. I think there are a couple of very important pieces to this to this mission. I think chief among them really is this talent-driven education and workforce system. For a number of years, under former leadership at our Department of Workforce Development, the mantra really was moving toward a demand-driven system. I think the issue that we had with that is that we were really focused on the needs of today rather than focusing on our needs for tomorrow. And so changing that just ever so slightly from demand-driven to talent-driven really puts the focus back on the people that we're trying to serve and the talent that we are creating to really drive our economy forward. And so with a new mission also came a new vision. And some of the things that Tom highlighted a little bit in his opening statement here, really about lifelong learning, it really hit on with all of our cabinet members, as well as how are we creating equitable opportunities for that lifelong learning, as well as one thing that we heard from all of our employers was that they were looking for ways to diversify their workforce. And so, I think that the talent-driven aspect of our mission, equitable opportunities for lifelong learning, and that diversification of the workforce really were three key components that we really honed in on as we were going through the development of our we also put together some guiding principles when we did our mission and vision. And so we have three of those: ensuring quality pathways for all Hoosiers, provide opportunities for career advancement, personal prosperity, and well-being. Partnering with our employers and our education and training providers. I think the cabinet can serve as a mechanism to have better integration between our employer community and our education community. And what we model from the state perspective, we hope that trickles down to the local level. And then strengthening our economy by aligning those programs and funding to meet current and future workforce needs. And so that's a little bit of the background. I'll pause there and see if anyone has any questions before we go on a little bit further.
Thank you, PJ. Tom Loughran coming in, I suppose I should be video present here too. We cannot hear you on occasion.
I see
and
that.
those
In the chat.
occasions are, we can see you quite well. So the occasions are remarkably innocent, where you do anything but practically as if you were head fixed to a cone to the microphone.
Okay. I will try to keep my head steady then.
Sure, as well as one can. Distance helps, 1/r²,
Yep.
right, for sound. So, yeah, that would be great. Thank you. On the whole, we were able to hear you, just not as well. So thank you.
Excellent. So I'll move on and really talk through kind of where we are right now and what our focus is. Really we have two priorities that we're focused on right now. Career and technical education. We became the authority for our Perkins federal CTE programs in the 2019 legislative session. And so we're really focused on that alignment between secondary and post-secondary career and technical education. Prior to us becoming that authority, it was really split across a number of state agencies. So the State Board of Education was granted the Perkins authority by the federal government, and then they MOU'd pieces of that authority out. So on the K-12 side, the Department of Education, which was charged with secondary CTE, and the Department of Workforce Development was charged with post-secondary CTE. Because we have all of those agencies on the workforce cabinet, we have employers on the cabinet, we thought it was best to move that authority under the cabinet to create that alignment between secondary and post-secondary CTE. And so now, we're really diving in on working in partnership with CHE, Ivy Tech, Vincennes, our IACTED, our CTE directors, to really create opportunities for better course alignment, better standard, better learning objective alignment across secondary and post-secondary. Career awareness activities. In the 2019 legislative session, we were given some grant funding to help expand career coaching and navigation opportunities. Last year, in August, we awarded 3 implementation grants as part of that funding, and then 11 planning grants to the communities. South Bend was one of those communities where we awarded a planning grant. And so we're excited to see what comes out of that. We will have another round of implementation grants here sometime later this spring, early summer, that we put out, and then we'll make those awards probably in July or August. And then work-based learning. There's a lot of focus. I was just in Elkhart last week talking about, or 2 weeks ago now, about youth apprenticeship programming. And the work-based learning cuts across a number of our state agencies. So really working with, our Department of Workforce Development, because they have the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship under them, but also our Commission for Higher Education just released their strategic plan in December, where they have a goal of having 100% of programs to study in the post-secondary space, having some career relevance activity tied to that. And so wanting to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction in regard to work-based learning. And then, really what we've been focused in on since about August of last year is systems alignment through our strategic workforce plan under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is the plan that the cabinet approved on Thursday of this week. And, we're very excited to now submit that to the federal government, and then hopefully then get approval by July 1st, where we can begin implementing many of the strategies that I'll talk a little bit about later. So in thinking about, where we are and what we can do for our career and technical education students, here's a brief overview of where we are annually in regard to our senior cohort. So each year we have about 85,000 students that start the school year, and then 9,000 of those students unfortunately will not graduate. And 25,000 of those that do graduate have no plan other than to get a job And then those that do matriculate post-secondary, 8,500 of those will be out of college after year one, and don't persist on into year two. So as a result, we have about 50% of every graduating cohort is out of our education system 1 year after they would have began college. And so through strengthening CTE, we can help combat some of these numbers. In 2018, we partnered with the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership on a grant through the Fairbanks Foundation to do some market research and assess the thoughts and attitudes of 4 main groups around the connection between education and a career. And from that market research, this is what we found. We looked at students aged 16 to 24, both that were in school and those that had dropped out, parents, educators, and employers. What we found, I don't think is really surprising, but it helped us kind of verify some thoughts that we had, some anecdotes that we had. Students really want practical skills, and more than half of them believe that what they were learning doesn't relate to real life. When I was in the classroom, I'm sure I was guilty of this, not necessarily connecting what I was teaching to anything beyond the 4 walls of my classroom. And so how do we really help ensure students recognize and acknowledge the fact that what they are learning does pertain to those things that they will do outside the class. Because we now are the CTE authority, this second one really hits home with me, the fact that awareness is lacking, and parents and students are not aware of some of our CTE programs, or alternate pathways beyond the traditional classroom and subject areas. And so how do we create better awareness around CTE and really start to hopefully knock down some of that stigma that continues to exist around career and technical education. Anxiety is high. Both students and parents, feel that they have to make that right decision, and are really paralyzed at times by the amount of information that they need to know and the complexity of that information in order to get to where they want to go. College being the default, and when I say college being the default, it really is that 4-year degree. And so how do we continue to get folks to recognize that, there are many paths to a good career, and it's really about the right fit at the right time. And that right fit might initially be an industry recognized certification. And then, as you get employed, continuing down that path of lifelong learning to where, that eventually you pick up that degree. So cost being a hindrance, the expected cost of a 4-year degree keeps students from enrolling. And so how do we continue to create awareness around the fact that, we do rank number 1 in the Midwest for the state of, for the amount of financial aid that we provide. And, we're number 4 in the entire country for the amount of financial aid that we provide. And so how do we continue to create awareness around the opportunities that exist? So I see a question here from Joseph in the Q&A about the focus on a 4-year degree. Joseph, I would say that, we don't have a focus on a 4-year degree. It really is on that entire continuum of lifelong learning. As I mentioned, really even, right fit, right time, starting with, an industry recognized certificate and then continuing. It's really about being able to stack those things together to where we can, get that education as they continue on. So let's see. So Tom, let's see. Can I locate an external microphone? I can see what I can do. I'll go ahead and pause for a moment then.
Okay. Thanks, PJ. Thanks to everybody in the chat room who's been pointing out that we could do better with audio than we are. This is an assembly of lots of particular connections, so thanks for pointing out those details. We'll try to respond to them. Let me also, while PJ's working as a technician here, let me point out what lots of you have already found out and have been pointing out to me, that the Q&A function, gosh, just was practically designed for this, right? For questions and answers. It works really quite well. A number of you have dropped questions in there. And so let's just make this adjustment on the fly. Let's use the Q&A feature in the webinar for direct questions. Let's continue. A lot of questions are, in fact, might even be combined with a lot of insights. So rather than having a set the stage with insight and then add a question, rather than those type of communications being present in any one place, let's try to split them and run them in two places. So let's put the insights, the links, we can develop all of that in the chat space, and then a short focused question that is, for which we invite the speaker to address it quite directly. Let's do that in Q&A. If we had 100 questions in there, that would be too much and we'd have to moderate them. If we have a dozen or less in that space, we can let the speaker moderate them himself or herself at the end of the session. So let's shift our mode of operation, as you have already cleverly figured out we should. Let's shift in that direction. So PJ, it looks like you're at work with something. And no need to respond yet, but just filling a little space for you here. Those of you who are who have panelist status, we're going to we'll invite questions. We should have a good chunk of time for questions here. This particular time with PJ could extend for as much as a half hour from now. We'll see, there's more slides to get through, but we should have a good chunk of time for questions and answers, and we can do that in two sort of ways. Number one, those who are in as panelists and who represent, I think of Chad 80, for example, who is a CTE principal for South Bend Community Schools, and others who represent broader constituencies, might just want to come in directly. And then participants all have access to the Q&A feature. And so far we've got 4 questions on the runway there.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Is there a way that I could get my phone unmuted and I could just talk through my phone rather than my computer?
There is a way to do that. I'm going to rely on Richard Allen from Notre Dame's technical staff to figure that out for us. If you can do that, Richard, if you can unmute a phone.
Hey, PJ, are you connected to the event through your phone?
I am, yeah.
What name are you under?
Well, I dialed in via the number that was.
Let's see.
The register. I'm happy to give you my number.
It looks like the 3 minutes.
Hold on 1 second, please. All right, you want to try it now?
Yeah. Yeah, how's that?
And to get rid of that, you've solved it already, it looks like. Thanks. Thanks, Ricky.
Is that better, everyone?
It seems to be so far, yes.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, much better. Order of magnitude, quality improvement. Sweet.
All right. Let's pick this back up then. Let's see here. Let's see. Can I do this? Okay. Awesome. So we were here. I had gone through the Q&A. Yes, Joseph, I also agree with you. K-8 education is critical for students choosing a STEM career. you're absolutely right there. Charles, I assume you're asking about local companies participating on the workforce cabinet potentially, and so we have a couple of companies up there. So Amy Brown with Flexible Concepts is on the cabinet, but then we're also engaged with a number of other companies. And then as I mentioned before, you know, we have a career awareness grant, planning grant, and so Leighton might be able to speak a little bit more to that later on, as the number of companies that could potentially be participating. Right now it's a planning grant, and so we're hopeful that after that planning grant period this year, we're able to move that into implementation phase. Going ahead and moving on with some of that market research that we did last year. Again, students believing that there just aren't a whole lot of opportunities in Indiana for the types of jobs that they want. You know, I think we have to do a much better job of outlining the career opportunities that exist here in Indiana for students, because we do have really good jobs. And, you know, I'm hopeful as we, you know, kind of change the paradigm around, you know, our focus on a talent-driven workforce and education system, that we're going to continue to create new opportunities within the economy as our talent continues to grow. Again, that expectations differing, and you know, who bears the responsibility to teach and communicate the value of education to students. You know, I think for me, since I've been in this policy space for about 6 years now, this third bullet, you know, kind of hit home. You know, and most folks believing that the state didn't value education. You know, I think for us, in the work that we try to do, whether it was my time formerly at the Department of Workforce Development, or the State Board of Education, or now with the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, you know, I think we really truly do value education and how it can connect, you know, and be an opportunity for the students that we're serving. You know, I don't think, you know, I come from a family of educators. You know, my mom teaches, my brother teaches, my sister-in-law teaches, I taught, and I have 7 cousins that either teach or are in administration. And so these last 2 things, you know, are things that we continually talk about at Thanksgiving and holidays and when we're all together. And so how do we continue to you know, enhance and create, you know, more opportunities for us to engage with our educator community as we're going through that. So let's see here. I can let me pull back up and see if there's anything in the chat that I need to necessarily answer right now. So let's see. Okay, no, awesome. So just, you know, a few things about our changing economy. I think that, you know, you folks are probably all aware of, you know, just the fact that 65% of jobs require education and training beyond high school by 2020. I think that is one of the things that, you know, we have to continue to hit home with for some of our students. You know, some recent research that was after our market research in 2018 has shown that, you know, about 45% of students right now believe a high school diploma is all that they need in order to get a good job. And so how do we continue to reiterate that it really should be a diploma plus? You know, whether, you know, it's Joseph's point earlier that it is, you know, starting off with an industry certification and then continuing to stack that on throughout that career. But what are those opportunities for lifelong learning really beyond a high school diploma? The fact that we need, you know, 1 million workers over the next 10 years, and the fact that we have the highest automation potential in the country. And so these are all things that have made us kind of take a step back and look at our current state of career and technical education in Indiana, and try to better align what is happening within the high school space and the post-secondary space. And so, you know, a few more statistics on that. You know, we have about, you know, 43.6% of Hoosiers having attained some type of post-secondary certificate. which really ranks us 39th in the country. We have set out a 60% goal by 2025, and oftentimes that 60% goal is misinterpreted as a 2 or 4 year degree. It does include certifications of all kinds, as long as the quality credential beyond high school. And so how do we continue to increase that 43.6% number to get to that goal? We have about 540,000 Hoosiers who started college but did not finish their credential. And then on top of that, we have another, 450,000 Hoosiers that don't even have a high school diploma. So, between the two of those numbers, about 1 million Hoosiers that we could help connect. And then I already mentioned earlier, we have about 85,000, seniors every year in a cohort. So how are we continuing to increase the post-secondary credentials that folks have? Here's our college going and performance for our students that earn AP and dual credit, AP only, dual credit only, and then we can see the on-time completion for those individuals that earn dual credit or did not earn dual credit. So you can see that for those folks that do earn dual credit while they're in high school, their on-time completion rates are indeed higher. And so that's one of the things that we are really trying to change within our CTE space, is that, we have an option for students to earn 1 year of post-secondary on the academic side through the statewide transfer general education core. That is the first 30 credit hours that they would earn their freshman year, that all of our post-secondary institutions accept, our statewide post-secondary institutions accept. So how do we have something comparable on the technical education side as well? And so really our early college models aren't just about, on the academic side, but how are we creating early college models on the technical side as well? Here's a little bit more about the number of high school grads that are earning dual credits. We're seeing that continue to grow, an increase of 16% from 2012 to 2015. And we saw 51% of our students earning dual credit, all of that dual credit within a single year. And the average student earns between 9 and 12 dual credit hours. So, I think it's quite amazing that right now we're at about 40% of students earning at least one semester's worth of credit, so 15 plus. But our goal within what we're trying to do with CTE is how do we make those dual credits more intentional for students as they are really trying to then cut down the amount of time that it takes to earn that degree. So, one of the things that we continually have conversations with some of our CTE directors and our CTE educators, is that, this career training and students and parents, it really is a lifelong endeavor. But we need to make sure that we have some portability of those credentials. And really looking at CTE, that stigma component of it that I think exists, that we're really looking at careers and not jobs, right? So what are those opportunities to advance along a career pathway and not just job training? And obviously, I think we're all aware that are on this call that, more education and training leads to higher wages and greater opportunity. So, here's a little bit of where we have been and where we're going. So in the past, under our Perkins 4 legislation, so this is the federal law that governs career and technical education. Our pathways were designed for flexibility. We only required 6 credits in the CTE space, and those included a wide variety of courses. It did not necessarily have to be along a single career pathway. With the passage or reauthorization of Perkins in July of 2018, that credit accumulation requirement transformed into course completion. we still have our courses defined as being 2 to 6 credits in length, and so we do have flexibility in the way that schools are offering career and technical education. But because of that flexibility and the new graduation pathway requirements for CTE concentrators to be eligible for graduation pathways now, there is not necessarily the same type of quality that exists, and we might see a student graduating with only 4 credits of CTE in some instances, and some students graduating with 12 credits of CTE in terms of graduation. So yeah, so Joseph, I will say that yes, I agree with you that only thinking about this focus on high school, we do need to think about that in the earlier grades. So fortunately, with the passage of Perkins 5, we can start to use some of our career and technical education funding in the as early as 5th grade to help create that awareness. And so that is an important part of that. That's also why, you know, we ended up creating the career coaching and navigation grants that we did as well, to really start to think about how are we providing those opportunities earlier for students to create those opportunities for awareness, and then that connection to what they might want to do, knowing full well that in middle school, late elementary school, middle school, a student isn't going to be locked into what they want to do. You know, I remember back when I was in 6th grade, I wanted to be a brain surgeon. So you know, and you know, my path went drastically different from that. So so when we think about that, so here, you know, and thinking about where this is, you know, the past, the present, and the future. Really hoping to get some consistent requirements across the board, you know, directly aligned to post-secondary, one, to cut down on time to complete, but then also if we're offering those opportunities for students while they're in high school, they might figure out what they might not want to do later on, to where that journey, their freshman, sophomore year of trying to navigate post-secondary and figure out what they want to do might also be cut down as well. So some of our redesign criteria here. So really trying to think through how we're aligning our pathways to middle and high skill occupations, and the fact that they can try to earn post-secondary credentials while they're in high school, improving the quality and consistency of the programming. And one of the things that we've, you know, really tried to hit on is the fact that, you know, a CTE concentrator should be both employable and enrollable at the end of their time, while still meeting that federal definition of the two courses. Let's see here.
PJ, I wonder if you could give just a word of explanation of CTE concentrator, a phrase more familiar to some than others.
Yeah, so a CTE concentrator is you know, one of the measures that we have by the federal government, how well we are performing in terms of getting students through a program of study. And that definition, as I mentioned before, under Perkins 4, it was focused on credit accumulation. And now with Perkins 5, that was passed by the federal government in 2018, the focus is on course completion within a pathway. And so for us, we have a definition that students pass two advanced courses within a CTE pathway, and I'll explain that here shortly, and what we're hoping to accomplish with some of the redesign that we're going through right now. And so, you know, really what is a program of study here? You know, creating multiple points of entry, not just for our high school CTE students, but it could also be for our returning adults into the Ivy Tech FinCEN space. Could also be for those 450,000 individuals that I mentioned earlier that don't have a high school diploma, that we're trying to connect to you know, some post-secondary credential while they're also getting that high school equivalency through our adult education programs. providing opportunities to earn valuable workforce credentials along the way, starting with, as I mentioned before, it could just be an industry recognized certificate. It could be, a one-year program, an Ivy Tech or Vincent, or it could be, a full-on associate degree that then could lead into some bachelor's degree on down the road. Really prioritizing our outcomes post-graduation for students, looking at those transferable credits and relevant skill experiences so that they do have that credential of value when they graduate before they even, either go on to post-secondary or enter the workforce. And so kind of here, this slide shows what we've been working on. So for those, high school CTE educators in the room, those yellow boxes here, so the principles course, the concentrator A, and the concentrator B course. This really is currently our level 1 courses. So think, advanced manufacturing 1, cosmetology 1, the computer science 1, all of those courses that we have in the CTE space. As I mentioned before, those courses are right now flexible to be offered from 2 to 6 credits. So as we're thinking about the fact that, how are we creating some semblance of uniform learning across our CTE concentrators as they're using graduation pathways, this 6-credit sequence is just that level 1 course kind of broken up into 2-credit chunks. Now, so this obviously is not the full entire pathway. There are still introductory courses that would exist prior to that principles course. But then, most of our CTE centers, and Chad might talk a little bit about this later on, most of our CTE centers are delivering this level 1 course, the principles, concentrator A and concentrator B courses within a single year, because most students are enrolled in 3 credit hours a semester. But we do know that some of our other high schools are offering these courses as well. And so if they're only offering 1 credit a semester, they would have an opportunity to start with the principles course as a sophomore, take the concentrator course as a junior, and the A course as a junior, and the concentrator B course as a senior, and still be able to meet that CTE concentrator definition for graduation pathways. So let's see, Gail asking, how will CTE pathways be implemented in middle schools? So that's a very good question, and one thing that my team is working on right now. We are trying to think through, I think there are 4 different pathways right now that are on the middle school course catalog. We are trying to think about how do we then, since we're really trying to backward map what we're doing here within our CTE space. So thinking about, what would happen from a career to post-secondary to secondary, and then, we're probably going to, at some point, go down to the middle school, not just creating those opportunities for career exploration and awareness, but what are some more specific courses that we have as well. And so, yeah, we do need to work on that as well. It's one of the things we have our team working on. So some of the advantages that we see with this new model, obviously improving the consistency and quality across the state. I kind of mentioned before the fact that, we right now are flexible in the way that we are delivering our CTE courses. Some schools are offering those courses for 2 credits. Some are offering them for 6 credits a year. And so how do we create some more consistency and quality there? The fact that a CTE concentrator would be comparable for each of our pathways, and the fact that the way that we've structured it, students would have the opportunity to explore multiple pathways. So if they, begin something their sophomore or junior year, they'd have an opportunity to change pathways and still be able to be a CTE concentrator. The capstone experience in course that I mentioned here on the previous slide, we would leave as flexible to be able to do either embedded work-based learning experiences or continue on to earn additional post-secondary credits. It is one of the things, as I mentioned before when I was in Elkhart last week, trying to think through some of the youth apprenticeship work
how are we offering opportunities for students to get some of those valuable work-based learning opportunities before they're able to graduate. And the capstone options would give us an opportunity to kind of customize those pathways, really based upon what the student wanted to do beyond high school. And so with that, I'll go ahead before moving into the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, talk a little bit, see if there are any questions here. So let's see. Yes, so I think Joe Wisniewski and Joseph Belina both in the chat room talking a little bit about lower socioeconomic students. You're absolutely right, and that's one of you'll see when I talk through our Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. Trying to provide opportunities both for that 2-gen approach. So how are we really working with parents and students to be able to really move their families on and elevate them into and create that economic mobility. Let's see, Nicole, middle school teacher, think courses would be awesome. Took wood shop and metal shop in middle school, which fostered my enjoyment of science in general. I think we can, all of us probably in the room, remember some of those courses that we took in middle school. And so I know that a lot of those have gone by the wayside. As I mentioned, we have 4 broad pathways right now on the books in the middle school space, but we need to look at how are we creating some better alignment, but then also just more of those opportunities across those various pathways that exist. So, any other questions? Okay. So that's our focus on CTE right now. We do have a pilot planning grant out to 36 school districts to help us look at implementing some of these changes next year, so we can learn lessons before full-on implementation on some of these things. So I'll talk a little bit about our other focus, and I mentioned at the onset the fact that the Workforce Cabinet approved our strategic plan at our meeting on Thursday, and so that really, we were really able to do that under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And so WIOA, as we call it in the office, we're all fans of acronyms. It's just federal legislation designed to strengthen and improve our nation's public workforce system, including youth and those with significant barriers to employment into high-quality jobs and careers. So WIOA was signed into law by President Obama in December of 2014. State Workforce Board, so the Governor's Workforce Cabinet is our state workforce board. They put together 4-year plans that we are able to go back and amend as we are learning lessons, so we can iterate on some of these things. So our first 4-year plan was submitted in 2016, and the plan that the Cabinet approved on Thursday will be submitted now by April 1st, and that will be our next 4-year plan that we try to integrate and align many of the different programs that the federal government and the state provide individuals. So our focus was on the individual that we are trying to serve through these programs. Traditionally, when states put together these plans with federal rules, they take a really programmatic view of things, and we thought that it was important that we serve the whole person. I mentioned at the onset, kind of piggybacking off of Tom's idea that education and workforce, the lines are getting blurred. Because workforce development anymore is just educational attainment. But really, we've been thinking about talent development as that integration of education, workforce development, and social services. And so I think that's why it's important when you look at the agency members that are on the cabinet. If you joined late, we do have our Department of Workforce Development, our Commission for Higher Education, Department of Education, our Family and Social Services Agency, Department of Corrections, Economic Development, and Career Connections and Talent. So trying to think through, how are we serving all of those individuals, regardless if they're, receiving SNAP or TANF benefits through FSSA or in our prison system. How are we getting them the education, workforce development they need to create that economic mobility? And so really understanding their individual barriers to employment and providing them the supports that they need to get there. And then working with our state agencies to streamline some of those services around eligibility and co-enrollment. So that was really in alignment with our mission and vision and guiding principles of the cabinet. This was how we went about creating the strategic plan. And so I brought together all of the agency heads that are on the cabinet in July, and we facilitated a human-centered design session where we outlined 5 different personas, everything from a single mother who was getting ready to go back to work, an individual that had been laid off, an individual that was struggling with substance abuse issues. And I asked all of our agency heads, how they would serve that individual. And what we found was right now there was a lot of overlap in the initial ways that they would support that individual. And said, okay, so let's pretend that this is a shared customer that we all have, and how are we wrapping around those employment skills, education, income supports around that individual to get them to where they want to go. And so that was really how we went about designing our strategic plan. So outlined within the plan, there are all of these target populations. So we have a section of the plan dedicated to each one of these. Some of them are more built out than others. Overall, there are 19 different subsections of the plan with a focus on individuals with barriers and getting them the proper supports that they need to get the education, get the training, get the social service supports that they need to be able to create those opportunities for economic mobility. So some of the goals that we had for the plan were really focused on meeting those individual needs of Hoosiers, recognizing that everyone has different needs, integrating our state systems to facilitate greater access to information, resources, career coaches, case managers, aligning our programs toward creating that healthy, engaged, and talented citizen, maximizing our state and federal resources. One of the things that, I saw when I first started with state government was that, we had a state system that was really running in parallel with our federal system. And so how do we better integrate those things together and leverage the resources that we have to really help people and move them on. And then 5th, fostering those impactful relationships between our businesses, community partners, government agencies, to where we're all working collectively together for the greater good of the individual. So these strategies were really woven throughout each of our subsections of the plan. So better data sharing, so we know if someone's being served at FSSA and DWD, how are we integrating those services together? Co-enrollment in programs, so recognizing that not one program has the resources necessary to meet everyone's needs. So how are we co-enrolling individuals in the programs that we have and kind of stacking those things on top of each other to get them to where they want to go? I did a listening tour session in all of our workforce board regions before we created the strategic plan. And co-location was one area that I heard throughout all of our regions where, we might have a DFR office that provides an individual with SNAP and TANF, and then, it might be a county over where we have a Work One providing workforce development support. So how do we, create better opportunities to integrate those services through co-location, whether it's shared staffing and some other things, to where we're really creating that no wrong door approach. Cross-training our frontline staff and our agency heads on just the opportunities that exist. I think that one thing that we learned from that July meeting with the agency heads was that, they were really unaware of just the programs that existed within the other state agencies. And so how do we create opportunities of awareness, not just for our state staff and frontline staff, but also for the individuals that we're trying to serve out there. And then employer engagement. You know, it's one of my priorities for this year with the cabinet is on, you know, better communication, marketing, and outreach, and really how are we fostering that relationship with employers to get them to recognize just where we have various talent pipelines that they might not be tapping into. So we have a number of strategies for individuals. And, you know, I shared the slide deck with Tom. I think we can send this out. I know I'm running close on time, so I'm not going to belabor all of the specific strategies that we have for individuals in here. But there are a couple of interesting things that I do want to talk about. One, I think the Summer Bridge program for at-risk youth and adult education to focus on that summer melt is one thing that we're really proud of in there. And then also the Second Chance Pell and ability to benefit. Second Chance Pell is for our folks that are incarcerated. And so how are we leveraging Second Chance Pell within our prison systems to get them the education they need before they're released. And then, you know, funding specifically for our juvenile justice facilities. We're going to start using some of our career and technical education funding that we have within our juvenile justice facilities. You know, we have strategies for employers within the plan as well, and really partnering with our state chamber and hopefully local chambers to kind of walk them through all of the opportunities for employers to take advantage of the various strategies within the plan. And then obviously this is all going to start at the state level, and then how do we you know, work to create a system that is really a model for how this could operate at the local level. I think based upon, you know, everything that you all are going to talk about today, between the regional partnerships and LIFT and the work that Leighton and that team is doing to the digital readiness and career connectedness and on-ramps, I think you all are, you know, up there are doing a lot of this already at the local level that we're really hoping to see us at the state level do as well. So that is really, you know, I think, you know, the implementation of our strategic plan is not going to be possible without regional partnerships and local stakeholders. As I mentioned, we're really just kind of at that next phase. We created the plan, we put it out for public comment, we've approved the plan. We're getting ready to submit that to the feds. And then by July 1, they will approve it, and we'll really work on implementation strategies and plans between now and July, and to where we'll be ready to rock and roll as soon as it's approved. And so working, you know, at a regional level is something that we're going to have to really focus on between now and then. You know, the changing economy is going to require that everyone have a basic foundation of not just numeracy and literacy anymore, but those digital skills. And as technology continues to change our economy, you know, we're going to have to really focus on that. And I know that the DOE is going to talk a little bit about some of the computer science initiatives here a little bit later. You know, opportunities for businesses and educational institutions to work better and more collaboratively together. You know, Tom mentioned that, you know, it's workforce development and education are really blurred lines now. And so how are we thinking about not only opportunities for our students in the pipeline, but also all of those individuals that need to be reskilled or upskilled, because we are the state that's most at risk for automation. And then just, you know, how are we really creating a navigable education system with clear on and off ramps? You know, it really has to be that lifelong learning is going to continue to be more and more important as our economy changes. And then obviously, you know, given the current situation that we're in, we adjusted today. We know a lot of schools are going through e-learning right now. You know, how are we thinking through new ways of learning and the delivery of content that's going to be vitally important as we move forward. So with all that, I've ignored the chat room for a little while. I'll try to open that back up just to see if there's anything that I need to discuss in there.
I think that's relatively clean now, PJ. Let me step in and first thank you for what is actually kind of a Herculean effort in a way. You can see at the density of our absorbing all this material, drinking from the hydrant, as it were, right? That there's a great deal of complexity in policy setting. One of the reasons I personally thought it was great for you all to come, the Governor's Workforce Cabinet traveled around the state, as you alluded to earlier, in a listening tour. And a lot of folks went to that listening tour when it wasn't you in this particular South Bend incarnation, but Blair Milo was there, and Sam Rourke was there, and others. We saw a real interest, right, in the Governor's Workforce Cabinet pulling in perspectives from a lot of different stakeholders. And in some ways, we want to return that favor. It's important that we not just see these directives coming down as if from Mount Horeb, whatever the 10 Commandments were issued on, right? Coming down from on high, but actually developed by people, right, who are wrestling with the complexity of these issues. It's pretty assuring, actually, to know that you've worn a teacher's hat in this space, right? And that it's not, as you say, around the Thanksgiving dinner table, it's not a crazy question to ask, what does the third grade teacher who's dealing with somebody who's just transitioning into reading late, right? And has hopes for this child to also transition into math numeracy, I should say, math literacy. And by fifth grade, right, starts to master, ratios, fractions, decimals, percents, reading and interpreting graphs, to use one nice description for what you want to pick up in those pre-algebra years, so that you can do algebra, so that you can do chemistry, etc. Right? And that's sort of an on-ramp. And there's a real cultural challenge for the teacher wearing her third grade hat or his fourth grade hat. And what it's like to see these things come down from the top is it's good to look at it from that perspective. And it's good to know that you've got those connections and that experience. So maybe let me just ask one final question, if I may. There's a big cultural change. There's a whole host of cultural challenges. I couldn't begin to do them justice, but many of our participants know them from their individual perspectives. This can look like policy, right? It can look like forced requirements coming down from the top and out of touch or out of step, or needing a lot of translation, on the more positive way of putting it. What are the resources that we most need to build, to encourage, to tap, in order to bridge those kind of cultural gaps? Reaching down to people who don't have, for example, they either don't have a firm employment history in their family. It might be education. It might be plowing. Might be snow plowing. And yard work. Could be all kinds of things. But some folks don't have any of that kind of career direction in their family, right? And they're kind of hitting the streets cold. What are some of the challenges and some of the resources for meeting those challenges, for bridging the cultural gaps as you see them?
Yeah, I think personally that it comes back down to, and I mentioned earlier, the fact that I really hope to focus on communication and outreach this year as a top priority. We tend to oftentimes, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, Tom, about the fact that, a lot of a lot of things seem to come down from on high. We have to do a much better job of getting out into communities and creating awareness of things that exist. Not just to folks that would join this panel, but those individuals that would utilize the services that we provide. And so I think, I mentioned the market research that we had done in 2018. We've actually put together a communications plan on how do we get at some of that culture change that needs to exist, and are getting ready to begin to implement various pieces of that, and creating awareness, creating a culture change. And so I think communication is probably the #1 thing that we need to focus on, because I think the resources are there, but it's how to connect to the resources that we really need to do a better job of.
Super. Thank you. We can only scratch the surface here, but we are very grateful to you for spending time with us, for helping to bridge that communication gap here. Hopefully there's a lot of Q&A, insights, resources, etc. in the chat window, and we will make sure that you get a hard copy of that, a digital copy, by way of input from this crowd.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks, PJ.